So we start with chapter 15, Dynasties 21 to 24. The priests of Harhur and his successors, 1100 to 966 BCE. The king of Upper and Lower Egypt, the chief priest of Yemen, Yemen, son of Yemen, Harhur. Thus did the ambitious priest of Yemen, the head of the Theban clergy, style himself officially. When he took possession of Thebaid, Ra-Masu the 13th had, before his own fall, honored the first servant of the anti-Yemen in a distinguished manner, inasmuch as he had entrusted him with the most important offices of government. Harhur calls himself on the monuments as an hereditary prince, the fan-bearer on the right of the king, the king's son of Cush, chief architect of the king, chief general of the army in Upper and Lower Egypt, administrator of the granaries, as Yusuf was of old in the court of Pharaoh. Remember, there was no jade names in Tanakh. Such high dignities, which, in the course of time, were held by one and the same person, either together or in succession, must have essentially facilitated his project of overthrowing the sovereign. His position as the chief priest of Yemen secured to Harhur no inconsiderable following among the most powerful of all the priestly societies in the whole country. As in Upper Egypt it was the inhabitants of the Theban nome and the priests of Yemen who took part with the new king, so on. And, the table of kings that we went over would be important to look at for some of this stuff. On the other hand, in Lower Egypt, he had won over a moderate number of the holy fathers of the Ra-Masu city of Zawantanis, who stood in close connection with the imperial city of Thebes, owing to their common worship of Yemen. The letters and documents of the Ramesses, which have come down to us, leave not the slightest doubt upon this point. And yet the plans of Harhur were not destined to attain complete success, while Ra-Masu the 13th and his successors, according to all probability, were banished to the great oasis. They had raised up in silence an enemy to the priest kings whose power and importance might be brought in to aid their cause. On the east of Mesopotamia, the great empire of the Kheta had been succeeded by a new race of rulers, to whom the Egyptian monuments of the time gave the short name of Ma, and whose ruler they designated, or Ma, is it just plain Ma? And whose ruler they designated as the Great King of Kings. Since the year 1876, when Dr. Brugsch first brought out his history, his opinions concerning these Ma, whom he then designated as the Assyrians, have undergone considerable modification. It is no longer possible to regard them as Assyrians, although to define their nationality would be too bold a venture. They were certainly foreigners, as the determinative sign placed after their name when written in hieroglyphics clearly indicates. Mr. Bernauf believes that they should be considered Elamites, Shashank being the equivalent of a Susan word, Sasanku meaning the man of Susa. The professor Opert says that all the names of the 22nd dynasty are Susan. The Libyan origin of this dynasty is generally admitted by Egyptologists on insufficient grounds. Even though in a style which is rather pompous than historically true, Herhor conferred on himself the honorary title of Conqueror of the Ruthen, to which, in all probability, he had no right. It may be assumed that the power of these Ma had reached a strength which must at any rate have restrained the priest-king from thinking of conquests in the East. His successors, whom the reader will find named in the genealogical table opposite of that we've went over before, were far from securing a firm position in the country. Their most determined enemies were the banished race of the Ramessides, who succeeded in forming alliances with these foreigners under for a great-grandson of that Ramessu the 13th was overthrown by Herhor, married an unnamed daughter of the general of the Ma. The consequences of such a connection quickly appeared. The Ma marched against Egypt. In the 25th year of the reign of Pa-Enet the first, the grandson of Herhor, disturbances broke out in the Thebaid in favor of the Ramessides. Meantime, Pa-Enet, who had to await the attack of Nimrod, the son of that Shashank, who had married a Ramesside princess, remained at Tanis, while his son Menxperra was sent to Thebes with full powers to quell the insurrection. After that he had succeeded in doing this, he was named as his father's successor in the office of the high priest of Yemen. His first act was to recall the Egyptians banished into the oasis and their adherents. This was apparently done with the consent of Yemen, whose oracle had approved Menxperra's proposal. We learn this from the following inscription in Thebes. 1. In the year 25, the month Epiphi, the 29th day, at the same time as the feast of the entity Yemen Ra, the king of the entities, at his monthly feast of Apt on the south. 2. As Herhor in their multitude, the majesty of this noble entity, Yemen Ra, the king of the entities, was. 3. Thebes, he shows the way to the scribes, the land surveyors, and people. 4. In the year 25, in the first month of the year, Yemen Ra, the lord of Thebes. 5. The high priest of Yemen Ra, the king of the entities, the general-in-chief of the army, Menxperra, the son of the king, Bara Yemen Pa-Enet. 6. At his feet, their heart was joyfully moved on account of his design. He had come to Patoris, to the southland, in victorious power to restore order in the land and to chastise the opponents. He gave to them punishment they deserved and established to the old order of things, just as. 7. It had been the time of the reigns of the sun entity Ra. Remember the mythical age where the entities considered to be gods ruled for inordinate periods of time. He entered the city of Thebes with a contented soul. The families of Thebes received him with songs of joy. Messengers had been sent before him. The majesty of this noble entity, the lord of those considered to be gods, Yemen Ra, the lord of Thebes, was much brought out in procession. He rewarded 7. Him very much. He pleased him in the east of his father as chief priest of Yemen Ra, the king of the entities, and was as general-in-chief of the army of Upper and Lower Egypt. He dedicated to him numerous and splendid wonderful works, such had never been seen before. Now had reached its end. 9. The month Masore, on the 4th intercalary day, the day of the birthday feast of Yestsa, Isis. At the time of the feast of Yemen, on the new year, the majesty of this glorious entity, The lord of the entities, human Ra, the king of the entities, was brought out in procession. He came to the great hall of the temple of Yuman and rested before the pylon of Yuman. And 10. The general-in-chief of the army, Menkhper Ra, went in to Yuman Ra, the king of the entities. He worshipped him much, with many prayers, and set before him an offering of all sorts of good things. Then the high priest of Yuman Ra, Menkhper Ra, added the words, O thou, my good Lord, there is a talk, and it is repeated by the people. 11. Then the entity gave full assent to him. Then he again went to this entity and spoke thus, O thou, my good Lord, this talk of the people is a complaint on account of thy anger against those who are in the oasis in the land which thou hast appointed for them. Then the entity gave a full assent. 12. To him, therefore, this chief captain lifted up his hands, praying in order to worship his Lord, as the moon changes with the sun, unless he spake. Hail to thee, thou creator of all being, thou bringer forth of all being which exist, father of the entities, creator of the female entities, as they remain in the cities and in the villages, begetter, 13, of men, bearer of women, who dispenses life to all men, for he is skillful, master of work, the life of the great entity, the fashioner, who creates provisions in abundance, who brings forth sustenances for the entities and men, sunshine by day, moonlight by night, who traverses the heaven in peace. 14. Without rest, as the greatest among the spirits, powerful as the female entity, sucks, the lion-headed entity treated as a goddess, resembling the sun, be again friendly disposed to the banished ones, against whom thy command went out. Do thou recall it to heal what is diseased. Look graciously upon this people who do not stand before thy countenance, for there are 15, 100,000 of them. Is anyone able to appease thee if thou at all turnest thyself away? Hail to thee, thou shining beam. And Namaskara kind of includes phrases like that, right? Making obviously they're worshiping the sun, right? Listen to my words on this very day, mayest thou feel a pity for the servants whom thou hast banished, 16, to the oasis, that they may be brought back to Egypt. Then the great entity gave full assent to him. Then went in the captain of the army again to this great entity, speaking thus, O thou, my good lords, since thou hast assented to their return, let it be published abroad that thou art friendly, suppose, to the banished ones. Then the great entity gave full assent to him. Then went he in again, and by full assent to him, the priest gave permission. Right. Again, 17. To the great entity and spoke thus, O thou, my good Lord, give forth a valid command in thy name, that no inhabitant of the land shall be banished to the far distance of the oasis, that no one from this very day forever. 18. Then the great entity gave full assent to him. Then he spake again to him, Speak that it may be done thus, according to thy command, which shall be written down on a memorial stone in writing, and set up in thy cities to last and to remain forever. Then the great entity gave full assent to him. Then spake again the chief priest, 19, of Yemen, Menkhper Ra. O thou, my good Lord, now I'm contented 100,000 times. This was my intention, that all families should hear it. All their words express contentment with me. I am thy servant in truth, for I am thy likeness. 20. In youthful form for thy city, I was created as originator of all riches according to thy word. When I was yet in my mother's womb, thou didst fashion me in the egg. Thou didst bring me to the light, to the great joy of thy people. Give me a beautiful duration of life, 21, in the service of thy being, and purity and protection from all thy plagues. Let my feet walk in thy ways, and make thy path straight for me. May my heart be friendly towards thy house, to do what thy commands enjoin. 22, give me consideration with a great entity in peace, that I may abide and live in thy glorious house. In like manner, may all reward be mine from. 23, then did the high priest of Yemen, Menxpera, go into the great entity and spake thus: if any one of the people should go in thy presence, contradict, saying that he has done great things for the people, that the land may gain life, then destroy him, kill him. Then the great entity gave full assent to him. The distracted state of the empire could not have been more clearly exhibited than in this inscription, even if we reject the 100,000 banished ones of whom the high priest speaks. The whole proceeding throws a sad light on the state of things then prevailing in Egypt. Persecutions and banishments form in every age a measure of the internal condition of an empire, that the recall of the exiles from the oasis proposed by the priest king Menxpera did not spring from any special goodness of heart, but was a politic measure to quiet agitation fermenting in the country. Can hardly require further proof. While the events were taking place, which the inscription sets forth in such an ambiguous manner, it appears that Na-Romath Nimrod, who had been associated on the throne by his father Shashank, had advanced into Egypt with an army, not only to render help and support to the Ra-Masidas, but also with intention of conquering the country. Here in Egypt, death surprised him. His mother, Mahatnan Isak, was an Egyptian, in all probability a daughter of the 14th Ramasu. According to her desire, her son was buried in Abydos, and the feasts of the dead were instituted in his honor, the cost of which was to be defrayed from the income of certain estates. At the same time, men and women were appointed for the preservation of his tomb. Herds of cattle were purchased, and all other things provided, which could serve for a worthy establishment in honor of the dead. When Egypt had thus become subjected to Shashank I, Pasebkanu, the brother of Menxpera, was left as sub-king at Tanis, while the conqueror fixed his capital at Bubastis. Meanwhile, Menxpera carried on his functions as chief priest of Yemen and Thebes, where, as we have reason to suppose, Ramasu the 16th was for some time, in name at least, recognized as king. These measures were evidently taken during the presence of the elder Shashank, grandfather of the above-mentioned prince, who afterwards became Shashank I in Egypt. He visited Thebes and did not fail on his journey to the city of Yemen to pay a visit to the grave of his beloved son at Abydos. He was bitterly chagrined at its neglected state. The Egyptian officials, who probably had little inclination to honor the remains of a foreign king, had plundered as far as they could the temple revenues, which had been appointed for keeping up the grave. They were brought to an account by Shashank, and with the approval of Yemen, they were all punished with death. These circumstances have been handed down in a lengthy inscription on a granite block at Abydos. Even though the upper half of the stone is wanting, the under part is well preserved, so far at least, that the contents can be read without misapprehension. Here is the translation. To Yemen Ra spake the general of the Ma when, Generalissimo
Shashank had visited his son at his beautiful burial place with his father Yasir, where his body had been laid on his bed of rest in the city of Nefer, Abydos, and the site of the temple of Yasir. Thou hast freed him from attaining to an infirm old age while he remained on earth. Thou hast granted him his rest. My feast will consist in this, to receive the undivided victory. Very much did the great entity give assent to him. Then spake his majesty anew to the great entity thus: O thou good lord, put to death the captains of the army, the secretary, the land surveyor, and all whom I sent of commission to this estate, and who plundered the property of the altar of the your general of the Ma, Assyrian. Na Romath, Nimrod, the son of Mehet and Usek, was buried in Abydos, and all the people who have robbed his holy property, his people, his herds of cattle, his gardens, his offerings, and all that was dedicated for his honor, act according to the Great Spirit and its whole extent to replace them again, and to replace the women and their children. The great entity assented to this most graciously. Then his majesty threw himself on the ground before him, and his majesty spoke thus: Grant triumph to Shashank, the general of the Ma, the great generalissimo, the glorious, and all those who are with him, and all the warriors and all his people together. Then spake to him Yemen Ra, the king of the entities: I will do according to thy wish. Thou shalt receive the blessing of a great age and remain on earth, and thy heir shall sit on thy throne forever. And his majesty had the statue in the form of a walking man of the Yasir general of the Ma, the great generalissimo Na Romath, brought up the river to Abydos. There were in attendance on it a large body of soldiers and many ships. No man knows their number, together with the ambassadors of the general of the Ma, and it was set down on the splendid royal chamber of the Holy of Holies, on the right eye of the sun, to carry the offerings on the altar table of Nefer, according to the directions of the holy anointing. The dedication was accomplished. The incense was burnt in the temple, in the room of the star chamber, for 3 days. This was set up for the temple ordinances in the form of a written record, according to the contents of the ordinances for the feast of the entities. A memorial tablet was erected in the language of the land of Babel, containing the command of the great entity in his name. And the memorial tablet, was laid up in the Holy of Holies of the entities forever and ever. This is the catalog of that which is appointed for the altar of the Yasir general Na Romath, the son of Mehet Na Osuk, who was buried at Abydos. There were allotted to it the people who had been brought out of the countries of the general of the Ma, namely Ae Roma Patut, of the people of the Phoenicians and the obedient at call, Ku Yemen, and a Phoenician called Bekbata. The price of their purchase makes in silver money 15 pounds. His majesty had given them in silver money 20 pounds, making together 35 pounds. This is the number of which they cost. The 50 arura of land, which are situated in the region of the heights to the south of Abydos, which is called the permanent duration of the kings. Suteni cost 5 pounds of silver money. Is that supposed to be Suteni? Cost 5 pounds of silver money. The fields, which are situated by the side of the canal, is at Abydos an estate of 50 arura. For those, there was paid 5 pounds in silver money. This makes together an estate of 100 arura. In these two places, in the region of the heights to the south of Abydos, and the regions of the heights to the north of Abydos, For this estate, 100 arura. There was also paid 10 pounds in silver. Catalogues of the servants for the estate. His servant Pa Uar and his servant Arebek, his servant Bupa Imanka, his servant Na'e Shenu, his servant Pesh and Horror, making a total of 6 servants, for whom there was paid for each 3 pounds and 1 ounce of silver money, making in all 8 pounds of 6 ounces of silver money. His boy and his boy, some parts are missing here, son of Hur-se Issa. For this was paid 4 2/3 ounces of silver money. The garden, which is situated in the district of the northern heights of Abydos, costs 2 pounds of silver money. The gardener, Hormus, the son of Penmer, an unknown amount and 2/3 ounces of silver money. The water carrier, the son of, for 6.5 ounces of silver money. The catalog of the maidservants, Nesta Tep, whose mother is Tatmut, the maiden Tat Esse, the daughter of Nebet Hapet, whose mother is Ari Amek, the maiden Tat Iman, the daughter of Pinahas, the maiden, the daughter of, for each one 5 2/3 ounces of silver money. The outlay for the purchase of honey, the amount of 3 2/3 pounds of silver money, and is charged upon the treasury of Yisur, so that the hin measure of honey shall be given by the treasury of Yisur for the daily supply of the Yisur general of the Ma, Na Ro Ma, whose father is in the great general Isimo, Shashank, and whose mother is Mehet and Usek for all eternity. The treasury of Yisur is charged with the money for this, neither more nor less. The outlay for the purchase of Basalm shall amount to 4 2/3 pounds of silver money, and is charged in the treasury of Yisur, so that 4 ounces of Basalm shall be delivered from the treasury of Yisur every day for the offering of the Yisur general of Ma, Na Romath, whose mother is Mehet Na Usk, to all eternity. For the provision of the Basalm, the treasury of Yisur is charged with the money, neither more nor less. The outlay for the purchase of incense shall amount to 5 2/3 ounces of silver money, and is charged in the treasury of Yisur, so that a hin of plus 2/3 ounces shall be delivered from the treasury of Yisur every day for the keeping up of the burning of incense for the Yisur general of the Ma, Na Romath, whose mother is Mehet Na Usak to all times. For the procuring of the incense of the treasury of Yisur is thus charged with the money, neither more nor less. The outlay for the different persons of the spice kitchen for the persons of the labors of the harvest shall amount to each some unknown and 3 ounces for each 1 ounce of silver money, and are thus charged for the treasury of Yisur, so that they shall be delivered, the spice cakes each day from the treasury of Yisur, that they shall be delivered from the treasury of Yisur, and that shall be delivered from the treasury of Yisur for the altars of the Yisur general of the Ma, Na Romath, whose mother is Mehet Usak to all eternity. 4. The support of the workmen of his spice kitchen, the money for it is also charged in the treasury of Yisur. For the harvest workers in the upper fields, the payment of these are charged on the treasury of Yisur to the amount of in silver money, neither more nor less. This is the sum total of silver money for the people, which is charged on the treasury of Yisur, so that the payment shall be made from it, which are to be borne by the treasury of Yisur for the altars of the Yisur general of the Ma, Na Romath, the son of the general Lismo of the Ma. Shashank, whose mother is Mehet and Usak, is assigned for the Yisur general of the Ma, Na Romath, the son of Mehet Na Usak, who was buried in Abydos for the estate of 100 arura of land, for 25 men and women, for the gardens, and its amount of silver money to 100 and some odd pounds and some odd ounces. The statue of Na Romath in red granite is now in the museum in Florence. The son of that general Nimrod was raised to the Egyptian throne. He is at Shashank, of whom the founder of the 22nd dynasty we have to speak in the next chapter. At about the same time, by direction of this Shashank, the affair of the inheritance of the princess Ka Ra Ma'at for this instance, and not Ma'at Ka Ra or Ra Ma'at Ka, ought to be the name to be read, was regulated by the express royal command in the name of the Theban circle of entities. This lady was the offspring of a marriage of King Paseb Khanu I, with a Theban Ramesida, and, according to a frequent Egyptian custom, she had been robbed of her patrimony situated in Upper Egypt by arrangement with King Shoshank I, for this Ka-Ra-Ma'at was his wife. Her position was completely changed. The ordinance which relates to the agreement for the placing of the princess in her full hereditary right is engraved in large letters on the north wall of the third pylon of the south of the great temple of Yemen at Karnak. The upper half of this wall is completely destroyed, and in this case, the first lines of the inscription, which contain the date and the name of the king, are unfortunately wanting. We give the complete and literal translation of this stone document so important historically, and leave it to our readers themselves to draw at the conclusions which follow from it. Thus spake Yemen Ra, the king of the entities, the great entity of the beginning with all being, and Mut and Khonsu and the great entities, with regard to any object of any kind which Ka-Ra-Ma'at, the daughter of the king of Upper Egypt, Marie Yemen Pasipkhanu, has brought with her of the hereditary position which she demanded to her in the southern district of the country, with regards to each object of any kind, whatever which the people of the land have presented to her, which they have at any time taken from the royal lady, we hereby restore it to her. Any object of any kind, whatever, which belongs to inheritance to the children, that we hereby restore to her children for all time. Thus speaks Yemen Ra, the king of the entities, the great king of the beginning of all being, Mut, Khonsu, and the great entities. 2. Every king, every chief priest of Yemen, every general, every captain, the people of every condition, whether male or female, who had great designs, and they who carried out their designs later, they shall restore the property of all kinds which Ka-Ra-Ma'at, the daughter of the king of Upper Egypt, Yemen Pasipkhanu, brought out with her as her inherited estate in the southern district. 3. Of the country, together with all the possessions of all kinds which the inhabitants of the country had given her, and what they had at any time taken from the lady, it shall be restored into her hand. We restored it into the hand of her son and her grandson, and to her daughter and her granddaughter, the child of her daughter, that should be preserved to the latest times. Again spake Yemen Ra, the king of the entities, the great entity of the beginning. 4. Of being and Mut and Khonsu, great entities, slain shall be all the people of every condition of the whole land, whether male or female, who shall claim any object of any kind whatever, which Ka-Ra-Ma'at, the daughter of the king and the lord of the land, Yemen Pasipkhanu, brought with her as an inheritance state of the southland, and any object of any kind whatsoever, which the inhabitants 5 of the land have given her, which they have at any time taken from the lady's property, they who shall keep back any object thereof, one morning after another morning, upon them shall our great spirits fall heavily. It will not be a helper to them. They shall be full of snares, on the part of the great entity of Mut, Khonsu, and of the great entities. Thus spake Yemen Ra, the king of the entities, the great entity, the beginning of all being, and Mut, and Khonsu, and the great entities. 6. You will slay every inhabitant of every condition on the whole land, whether male or female, who shall claim any object of any sort whatsoever, which Ka-Ra-Ma'at, the daughter of the king of Upper Egypt and the lord of the land, Yemen Pasipkhanu, brought with her as an inherited state of the southland, and any object of any kind whatever, which the inhabitants of the country have presented to her, and which they have at any time taken away from the lady as their possession, they who shall keep back any object thereof, one morning after the other morning, to them shall our great spirits be heavy. We will not be any help to them. We will sink their noses into the earth. We will, and this is not continued too far, but we'll continue another time. Sharma, peace be unto you.